Hey, it's Cassidy, your friendly internet tired writer here, and welcome to another video. I got a comment recently on my "Where did all the positive stories go" video. Anyways, the comment asked me if I had any advice on how to create a complex and interesting character without making them inherently negative or traumatized. I'm not going to give any explicit advice because I'm not comfortable doing that, but I think it's an interesting topic to explore, and it's kind of a follow-up to that video. So thank you to that commenter for this video idea. Saves me some time. A lot of writers default to giving their characters a bunch of trauma. It's interesting to write, it's fun to write, and it's an easy way to give depth to a character. And hey, I'm definitely guilty of this. I mean, my trilogy was filled with traumatized characters, because at the time, I was 13, I thought that's what made characters interesting. It's a good read despite all the trauma, or maybe because of it? But on my current writing projects, I'm trying to make characters complex without giving them all a bunch of emotional baggage. Need some of their hands free. For like swords and magic and general items of use. So, what makes a character complex without trauma? The nature of personality. If trauma was the only thing that made people interesting, then these characters would be the most interesting characters in Marvel. But when it comes to characters, I do understand where people are coming from when they say trauma makes characters interesting. But there are some very interesting positive characters out there. And I think it's because those writers followed one simple rule. Write positive characters the way you write negative characters. Experiences, flaws, beliefs, virtues, all these things combine to create a character. A really important thing to remember is that people without major trauma have experiences just like people with major trauma do. Experiences shape everyone. So just as you would give a character a reason they have trust issues, you should give a character a reason why they would trust appropriately.
People don't trust you, Frank. You're a piece of shit.
You know, the Parr kids have traits based on being raised in a loving, two-parent, mostly stable household. Just like Thor and Loki have traits based on being raised in a loving, two-parent, mostly stable household. The ones who get it, get it. A really good example is Merlin from the TV show Merlin, one of my favorites. It's filled with characters who are inherently positive despite going through some kind of iffy things. The main character Merlin doesn't have trauma pre-episode 1, and he manages to maintain his positive outlook throughout the show, despite going through some pretty traumatizing situations. Everything about his character works together to make him complex. For example, being a powerful wizard, Merlin has every reason to be arrogant. I mean, I would be arrogant if I could conjure flames and slow time with my mind. But he's not arrogant, and I believe it's because of two main factors. One, he comes from humble beginnings. He was raised by a single mom in a small village. And two, magic's illegal and he could get the chop. Merlin is constantly humbled because while he does have this great power, the law has power over him. The circumstances and his experiences create this humility, but his humility also influences his experiences, and it just all works together to create an interesting and complex character. That being said, experiences are not all that makes a character, because if they were, then yeah, people would be defined by their traumas. Characters, no matter if they're positive or negative, have traits that are not directly connected to their experiences. Which brings me to nature versus nurture. I am definitely of the belief that when creating a character, experiences should influence traits and traits should influence each other. It's just one big tapestry. But I also know that there are some traits that are simply unrelated to external forces. For example, the Joker from The Dark Knight is, in my opinion, memorable because he's quirky. Wanna know how I got these scars? It's because I'm quirky.
And I thought my jokes were bad.
But despite the quirkiness, he's obviously a negative character. but there's no actual evidence in the movie that his quirkiness is related to whatever's going on up here. In other words, not every personality trait is a result of nurture. Sometimes it's just nature. Jerry Seinfeld, the character, not the actor, is funny because that's just who he is, not because it's a coping mechanism. Steve Rogers is courageous because he has a strong moral code, not because he feels like he has something to prove. Rory Gilmore is a bookworm because she likes reading, not because she needs to escape reality. And Arthur is self-sacrificing because he's noble, not because he has a martyr complex. So when you ask,
why are you the way that you are?
Sometimes the answer is your blood, not your scars. So writers, remember that trauma is not the only thing that makes your characters interesting. It is another branch on the tree, but it is not the trunk. And the experiences might be the trunk, but the trunk is not the roots. Your character is an entire tree. I have a feeling I might beat this metaphor to death before the video's over. Positive arcs and change. So that's on creating a positive character. Now what about developing a positive character? Well, there are generally 3 types of character arcs: positive, negative, and flat. The key one here being positive. Positive arcs involve self-improvement. The character overcomes an internal or external conflict and becomes a better person because of it. Notice I never specified the character needs to start off negative. Change doesn't mean negative to positive and positive to negative. The fantasy protagonist doesn't need to watch their mother die. The villain doesn't always need to redeem themselves. Negativity can transform into another negativity. Take Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. She starts off as angry and antisocial, and she just degrades further into, a psychotic episode? I don't know. And positivity can become a different positivity. For example, Arthur, the deuteragonist of Merlin, is a positive character with a positive arc. He starts off arrogant but noble. He is a prince, it kind of makes sense. While he does see people, including Merlin, as below him, he is willing to lay his life on the line for those he sees as beneath him. That's gotta be some sort of complex. Or maybe people are just more complex than that. And it might be this nobility, paired with his friendship with Merlin and others below him, that contributes him to becoming less arrogant as the show goes on. But Arthur, an already positive character, was able to grow and change. He was able to become a better person through a positive character arc. But a vital aspect to this positive arc, and what I think is a vital aspect to many positive arcs, is that Arthur overcame a flaw. Flaws. The positive character's best friend. Okay, maybe not a character's best friend, but definitely a writer's. If you're a writer who wants to write a character who is inherently positive, without a traumatic backstory, and without an arc that traumatizes them in the future, then personality flaws are, in my opinion, going to be your most valuable tool. Just like trauma, flaws are not the only thing that makes a character complex, but they are basically on every character creation checklist. See, stories are fueled by conflict. There is no getting around that. I have tried. I'm pretty sure it's because conflict is inherent to human beings in society, but I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole. If you don't want your character to be traumatized, past, present, future, then you need to utilize a part of their personality or life to be a source of conflict. Flaws are probably the easiest way to do that because a character can be flawed but still be inherently positive. Like Arthur, he is arrogant, which is a character flaw, but he's still positive. A positive character with no flaws would just be boring. For example, Steve Rogers, in my opinion, would be boring if it weren't for his likability and the experiences he has as a character. He doesn't really have any major flaws that I can think of. So his growth has to come from external influences, like for example, choosing Bucky over Tony. I used to not like him that much because I just thought he was boring and perfect. I've since changed my mind, but flaws leave room for characters to grow. They are a way to give a character a positive arc. In the early seasons, Merlin's main flaw is probably irresponsibility. He's irresponsible with his magic, and it puts his own life and the life of others at risk. He relies on his magic to solve all of his problems, complete trivial tasks, and is just plain irresponsible with it. But as he matures and grows, he overcomes this flaw. By the 5th season, we don't see a reckless boy slinging magic at every problem that comes his way. We see a responsible wizard who relies on his wits more than his magic, and when he does rely on his magic, he uses it for the greater good. Growth. Everyone, no matter how positive they are, has flaws. Everyone has something they need to work on. Real people get therapy. Fake people get put into life-threatening situations. But everyone has flaws. So a character arc that deals with overcoming a flaw is something the audience can connect with, especially if the flaw is as common as arrogance and irresponsibility. I mean, I think the majority of the audience can relate to Arthur and Merlin's arcs more than, for example, Morgana's, the main villain of the show. You know, she starts off as good, but then through trauma and manipulation becomes a straight up villain. And yeah, I know a lot of people can relate to trauma and being manipulated, but not a lot of people can relate to being so hurt that they decide to destroy the lives of everyone they once loved. I really hope. I just think more people can relate to overcoming arrogance and irresponsibility. I mean, 20-something-year-olds do it all the time. Anyways, writers, I know trauma is an easy and effective way to give your characters depth, but flaws are just as easy and just as effective. Plus, you know, if you don't want to depress the crap out of your audience, which is fun, but you don't want to become a one-trick pony, you know, maybe just let your characters overcome a part of them that kinda sucks. Not everyone can make arrogance entertaining and quirky. Turns out arrogance is more charming on a genius billionaire playboy philanthropist than a king. I don't make the rules. Remaining positive in the face of trauma. Just like people, characters can respond to trauma 3 different ways. Negatively, indifferently, or positively. Characters who make it through traumatic situations and retain their positivity usually respond positively or indifferently. A really good positive reaction example is when Arthur has a chance to kill Odin, the man who ordered his father killed. But Odin is also a king, so killing him would start a war. Instead of getting revenge, Arthur decides that that's the end of bloodshed. He spares Odin's life. It shows his growth as a character. He's reacting positively to a negative and emotionally distressing situation. And then there are indifferent reactions, and these reactions are extremely common in quest-type shows and in superhero media. It's a way to put characters through conflict without affecting their character too much. This can be seen as cheap, but the thing is, in a show like Merlin, or with superheroes, when the characters are faced with dangerous situations all the time, it does make sense that they would become a bit numb to those situations, or at least be able to move on quicker from them as time goes on. That's kind of how a lot of people work. You get desensitized the more you're around something. So if characters reacting indifferently to situations or getting over them quickly feels cheap to you, I understand why it would. I do think it can be cheap. But I also think that extreme stress is not always the most realistic reaction, especially when you're 5 seasons in. At that point, the quest of the week that brainwashes your wife should just be another Tuesday, innit? I'm so sorry, UK viewers. Please do not unsubscribe. I think a good real-life example, and the same example I used in my positive stories video, is soldiers. The majority of soldiers do not come back home with severe mental stress. Most do not have PTSD. Some people are just able to escape situations without being traumatized by them. Some people are able to move on and not suffer. I don't know why some people can, but just some people can. It's just how it is, I guess. But positive characters can also react another way, negatively, temporarily. I'm not actually counting anything. The thing is, people are going to react negatively to negative situations. I mean, if you're being robbed, you're probably not gonna laugh it off. Fear cuts through positivity. Grief cuts through positivity. These things will affect even the most positive characters. For example, when he's betrayed by his half-sister Morgana, Arthur is in crisis. He's doubting himself. He's hated by pretty much his whole family. He lost his kingdom. He's giving in to fear and doubt and grief, but he overcomes it. He doesn't dwell in it for longer than is necessary, because sometimes even positive characters need to be negative. Everyone needs to freak out sometimes. But the important thing is to overcome the negativity. So a positive character being negative for a short amount of time doesn't make them an inherently negative character. In the face of trauma, inherently positive characters can react positively, indifferently, or temporarily negatively, whichever route you choose for your characters. Just make sure it makes sense for who they are, for what your story is, and for where you want your characters to go. But remember, characters don't need to break just because they're hit. Sometimes they just need to get up and tend to their wounds once the battle is over. Or maybe they'll get lucky and a wizard will show up and heal them. Stranger things have happened. Conclusion. Characters are as diverse as real people. Experiences, traits, flaws, everything that makes you makes a character. I mean, just not everyone is carrying a big bag of trauma on their backs. Fantasy is often a dark genre. So many stories are about war and death and destruction. I know for some writers it might seem difficult or unnatural even to put a inherently positive character in the midst of all that destruction. I know for me 6 years ago, it just did not seem like the thing to do. But it's not as hard or unnatural as some people might think it is. You just have to think about what makes people interesting in a different way. Yes, trials change and develop us, but we don't walk into battles blank slates. Characters are not defined by their traumas, by their experiences, by their flaws, by their beliefs, at least not alone. Characters are not defined by any one thing. Characters have roots and bark and branches and leaves. So before you cut off a branch to make your character grow, remember that trees grow for around 150 years. And if it's anything like the trees in my city, it's probably infected with a fungus that's gonna kill it anyways. I'm done ranting now. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. Another reminder that this is all my opinion. I am not an expert at anything, but I am a writer, so I hope to think I'm a little bit knowledgeable. Because if I wasn't, that would be concerning. Yeah, don't take anything I say as gospel, but I am definitely correct. Now for some self-promo. I wrote 5 books. They are all available on Amazon. There's a link in the description below. This is Before I Turn 18. It is a literary anthology about the transition from adolescence to adulthood. It is an existential crisis in a book. This is the Mortal's End trilogy. It is a fantasy trilogy and was actually the first thing I ever wrote. Ambitious for a 13-year-old. If you're looking for a fun, dark read written by a teenager who was just having the time of her life, then you might be interested in this. And this is We Shall Reap. I wrote it when I was 15. It is a standalone in the same world as the trilogy, but it comes before. Basically, a few groups of people are on this mission to find this ancient artifact, each for different reasons, and some of those reasons may or may not cause chaos. So yeah, if you're interested in morally gray characters, then this is the book for you. No, I'm not proud of it, but my water filter needs to be changed, and I just haven't done that yet, so plastic it is. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.